Got Zoom going, is that it?
Yeah. All right. Well, good morning. We're very grateful to have Jimmy Scott on this morning for an interview. Looking forward to getting some of the history and background and understanding a little more of where all this wonderful natural bioenergetics comes from. And grateful for Jimmy's time to give it to us straight from the creator founder. We're looking forward to a lot more history in the next little while. It's important that students understand our background. So Jimmy, please tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this group that brought muscle testing into the forefront. Maybe a little of your personal history, how you got involved in it, and give us some of the stories of what was being discovered back then.
Okay, well, back then is a long time ago now. I first got interested in this kind of work in about 1978, I think it was. And what happened was I had an organization. We were doing a lot of lectures and seminars and classes and things, one of which included a discussion about kinesiology from a local chiropractor. And I thought, that's kind of interesting stuff. So I had a chat with him. And so I said, well, how'd you learn this kind of stuff? And he said, well, there's a couple things you can read. These were chiropractic kinds of things. And so I looked at those and I thought, that's interesting. So I started kind of playing around with it. The first playing around was with a woman who came in. I was doing a lot of work with relaxation and biofeedback training and things like that. And so this lady came in who had a phobia. She just hated the traffic, having to drive on the highways and streets around the San Francisco area, metropolitan area, heavy traffic, et cetera, and she was freaked out by it. And so she came in one day, she started a new job the next day, which required a lot of driving on the freeways in the San Francisco area. So I probably overdid it with her, but I wanted to really make sure that it worked. So I spent an entire hour with her getting rid of her phobia. Now, the thing was, I was basing my kinesiology kind of stuff on what was already known from more traditional psychology. My PhD is in physiological psychology, so it all was an easy fit. And there were already known techniques in psychology for dealing with phobias. And that typically had to do with relaxing the person and then having them think about a stressful scene and then practice that while they stay relaxed and that kind of procedure. Systematic desensitization, for example. And so I thought, well, let me try that with the energy muscle balancing, energy balancing stuff and see if it worked as well. And so I spent a whole hour with her doing these things and tried to make sure it really worked and did every little angle I could do. I just had to think about stressful driving around the city and stay relaxed and that kind of thing. So I got a postcard from her a few days later saying, I enjoy driving on the freeways now. So that was a very good first example. So I got more interested in that kind of thing and started looking around. Now at that point, touch health was it. Applied kinesiology was it. There was no subdivisions here and new names there and so on and so on. So I did look around. I found at that point the single 2-day Touch for Health class. I took that, and then I began playing around with it, and also realized very quickly that it just wasn't enough. And so, in my own creative manner, I started developing new little tidbits of things and trying them out. And because I had a thriving practice of doing relaxation training and stuff, I had a lot of people I could experiment with, which was good, which was handy. And so that's how that all grew. And that was in 78, 79. I first talked about this kind of work, the way I was doing it in at the Touch Health meeting in, I guess that was in San Diego at that point. And it was on the 83, I guess it was, or 82, maybe 82. So I started talking about those kinds of things and people were interested and so I grew and developed from there. Now, being a doctorate in psychophysiology, it's a branch of psychology, then I already knew a lot about how the brain worked and how nerve connections were made and all that kind of stuff. And I also had the advantage of having read a lot of literature that other people didn't even know about at that point, coming back from the 30s and things like that, which they talked about relaxation and how to do relaxation. And that kind of technology was well developed, but almost unknown. So I began combining the two sets of materials, stuff that was known from as far back as the 30s, maybe even further back than that, along with the newer versions of getting relaxation and stuff. So I had become quite well known for being able to teach relaxation, teach stress training and stuff. So I discovered fairly quickly that with the muscle testing stuff, we could get to the bottom line, shall we say, much faster and easier.
Great.
So that was the basis of it.
Perfect.
And then as time went, of course, I'm that kind of person where I can't keep doing the same thing all the time. I get bored. So I began to think about changes, developments, and expansions and all that kind of stuff. And then the main one was I developed a technique for fixing allergies. And I use the word fixing quite deliberately because if the term allergy keeps the same meaning as you change languages and approaches, stuff like that, then I really was working with allergies. As an example, I developed this allergy technique, and one example was a student of mine in Switzerland. And after I was teaching other touch health and kinesiology things at that point, the fellow said that he asked whether I could maybe help his son who was allergic to bee stings. What had happened was his son had gotten stung by a bee a couple weeks earlier, almost died from the anaphylactic reaction. And so he had started with the medical system of getting a series of weakened solutions being injected to adapt the body to that. And so they usually you go in once a week or whatever, and it gives you a little injection, and then it gets stronger and stronger as time goes by until your body gets adapted to it, and so on and so on. That's systematic desensitization for allergies. That's pretty laborious. So he asked me if I could do something about his son's bee sting allergy. I said, I don't know, let's give it a try. So I told him to bring in some bees. He brought in 3 Swiss bees. This is Switzerland. And so I used this allergy technique with the bees and the boy. And the next week, he was taken to the medical allergist by his mom for another series of treatments. Whether they inject small amounts and repeat it and expand or make stronger or larger dose of the stuff as time went by, because you get less sensitive to things. So I said that, well, let's do this correction with the bees, and then see what happens when your mom, his wife at that point, the boy's mom, goes to the medical allergist. So that was the next week, actually. When she goes in with the boy, the medical allergist does this really tiny injection of the bee venom. Got no reaction. So it kept getting stronger and stronger. So he finally used his solution full strength and got no reaction. So he said, he doesn't need this, I'll just go home. So that was the first really nice demonstration of the effectiveness of the procedure, because the MD guy didn't know anything we had done, but the boy no longer reacted to bee sting by any measure he had. And I didn't know it would work like as well as it did, because it was the first time I'd ever done it. So everybody got what we wanted because it worked really, really well, and it was simple and like, wow, that's amazing. So that's how we verified independent with medical testing that it was working.
Excellent.
And that's the key thing about any kind of work like we're doing. We want independent verification and additional proof than just, I did this procedure and somebody got better. Well, that's good. That's a good start, but to get better, how about more detail about that?
Mhm.
Get better because you took the week off and had a vacation, or, or got better because you did some magic points in the body or whatever.
Yes, it's nice when you can have a medical test before, do the correction, and have a medical test afterwards and show the difference. That's a really solid way to move things forward. That's great.
That's right. And I started teaching this right away to people. This is the SET technique. And then one of my German students, he was called a Heilpraktiker, a health practitioner in Germany. And just a week or so later, he had a lady who came in who carried an epinephrine kit with her, EpiKit, because she could actually die from a bee sting if she got stung from the anaphylactic shock. And so he did the SCT procedures on the young lady. 2 weeks later, she actually got stung by a bee. Got no reaction.
Lovely. We love to see that happen.
It's like, what do you mean no reaction? She said, right? But she threw EpiKit away because she didn't need it anymore because of the SCT
Right.
stuff. And similar things happened in other ways. I was teaching, I had a lot of people come to classes in those days, the early days of kinesiology work. And actually a number of medical doctors and chiropractors and similar professionals were coming to my classes. And one of the people told me that he was in Australia with some friends. And while they're having lunch at an outdoor cafe, the fellow who was the target was stung by a bee, because what happened was the bee had flown down into his glass of veggie juice, or not veggie, fruit juice. He picked it up to take the swig, not knowing the bee was in there. The bee stung inside his lower lip. And they could see the lips expand right in front of their eyes. But by this time, I developed the tapping technique there. So they did that allergy tapping with this guy right away, and the swelling just disappeared again. And he said, looked inside the lip, there was this little hard circle there, but there's no swelling, no pain, and the tapping had done just marvelous and rapid benefit and effect. So that's the thing, you see, you can do things on a theoretical basis and understand, hopefully understand why they work and how they work and what to do. But that real world event is the real key. If I test 400 people and don't get a bee sting reaction in the office, and they go outside and get stung by a bee and get reactions, and well, what's that worth?
For sure.
And so that's the thing, these environmental things. And so anyway, word gets out, and more people want to learn the techniques, and so that's how I started doing a series of seminars in various countries and places, because people were wanting to learn this, and they found that it worked. If you take a class and you practice it and nothing happens, well, that's actually one of my favorite examples was another German guy who's a pediatrician, one of my students there, and he was in a district where meningitis, I think it was been developing. And he, as a medical doctor, then was required legally to vaccinate these various people. And so he said that what he did, he started using a little bit of the muscle testing I was showing. He was required to give the vaccination, but he would test to see how much of the vaccine they can handle. He would do the myology tapping stuff, test how much the vaccine he met the legal requirement of vaccination he had to do, but gave him as little as he could get by with, because he knew it wasn't very good stuff, vaccines. And so not only did he have no cases of meningitis, but nobody around anywhere had any cases anymore, because all the people he was working with doing the tapping and things. So his own area there had basically no cases. All around the country, people had lots of cases of meningitis.
Interesting.
So yeah, those kinds of things are anecdotal in one sense, but they're legitimately considered as in another sense, because these were results from experienced people who would have no reason to believe anything otherwise, except everybody gets it because everybody gets it, kind of thing. But the other thing,
Can we switch gears a little bit here? As you started to develop the system and bring, kind of unify your previous knowledge with the kinesiology knowledge that was being developed and discovered at that point, and you started to develop your own system. What are some of the key points that make yours different from the other ones sort of in the same group of people who are developing their own systems as well? What makes yours stand out? What makes yours different?
Several things. Let me give you one good example. In applied kinesiology, there's something called Riddler points. And this, so for example, what here in the base of the neck, where if you touch that into a muscle test and it goes weak, it means the body needs more calcium. You put some calcium tablets on their belly there someplace to retest it strong. And so that's how you can tell how much calcium to give. And that worked. It really does work. But the difficulty was I could be giving calcium to some people and they react to the calcium because they were allergic to the form of calcium. Okay? And so it's the calcium itself the test was correct, but it didn't tell me what kind of calcium to use for the person. So that was a shortcoming. So I started thinking, well, what can I do about that? And so it's in those early ways I started learning how to do the asking the questions verbally. And so I started playing with that. And so very soon I figured out I could test people for the different kinds of calcium, so which one is the right one for them to take with that Riddler point reaction. But it also occurred to me then I don't even need to touch the Riddler point, because why not just ask? Because I can hold my hand and say, is this the best one or not? And then we can muscle test it to affirm that it was the correct one, or at least a good one. And so that's how that started growing. It was just a practicality. Now, in those days, the only thing available was the chiropractic kind of applied kinesiology, and there was Touch for Health. There was no other kind of kinesiology that I knew about anyway, and I'm pretty sure that's correct, or very, very close to it. So I also began to realize there were shortcomings because the things I wanted to do and nobody knew how to do it. I thought, well, I'm a scientist, I do research, I'll figure it out. So that's what I started doing, figuring stuff out. And then, but also it may not have been strictly formal in the usual sense, but being a scientist too, then I was doing things and testing them scientifically. And it doesn't mean you got, 200 people you do this with and keep all that kind of data and analyze it. All that stuff is good, but that's not what happens when things are in the forefront of knowledge. Okay, people play with stuff at that point, at least my kind of territory. And so what I would do is I would actually I learned I could start asking questions about stuff. Well, might this work? Might that work? Should this one better than that one? But then I'd actually try it out. And this makes me think of an anecdote which I had kind of interesting time with. They talked about some of this stuff at a kinesiology meeting, Touch Off Me, I guess it was called at that point, in England. And I was talking about you could ask questions about these kinds of things, which in those days was impossible. People wouldn't believe it. They felt that was nonsense. And so what happened was there was one of these people who was well known in England for his work in Touch for Health. And so I had somebody come up and I did some verbal questioning, and I said, and I asked this fellow, I had asked him ahead of time if he would come up and try to do the verbal testing and himself instead of me doing it with somebody, see that it could work. And so he came up, he did it, and it worked for him. Now, he was a non-believer in asking verbal questions, but he was doing it, and it looked like it was successful. Everything worked out just right, and he was showing it actually did work. And so my intent, of course, was to demonstrate to people that it worked. The verbal question did work, and it was a very, very good approach, and you could save time and effort, and so on and so on. And so it all went really nicely, except about, as you may know, in most touch ball meetings and conferences, there's a balancing room somewhere, and people do playing around with whatever they're doing. So it must have been about midnight that night. We were in that room out there doing stuff. And he came up and he was angry at me. And I thought, well, why would he be angry at me? And of course, then I realized that I showed that he was wrong publicly. And I didn't do that to put him down. It's just that I wanted to demonstrate that people can do this kind of things. But he got very angry because I had kind of shown him up for not, you get the idea. And so this is the territory where social politics, I guess, and scientific methodology are sometimes at odds. Me being the scientist, I pay much more attention to that than the social consequences.
So back then with muscle testing, you figured out that if a body is balanced, you get accurate answers. How did you figure that? How did you come to that idea that if you were balanced, you get accurate answers, but if you're not, and how did you figure out what balance meant back then? How did you develop that concept that's so important to us?
Well, it's not just the balance to get accuracy, it's also how you phrase things when you ask.
Yes, of course.
And so the two together, in other words, the very strict structure of the language and the constant and related muscle testing are related or connected to each other. So one way is by, in terms of scientific tests, is to do it. Do what you ask the body what to do, then you try it out, and then you see if it worked. Is it okay to eat this apple now? Yes or no? It's sometimes an easy answer, sometimes not. So that's pretty much how I grew at first, because in a new territory, you don't know exactly what to do, what you're dealing with, what's constant, what's not constant, what's everything. We just don't know anything at all at one point. Well, being the scientist I am, then I was, oops, sorry. I was always being a scientist at the same time of being a clinician and a curious bystander in a sense. And I began talking about this kind of stuff. And so I started developing theoretical models of things, and I would talk about.
Your volume just dropped off there. Can you?
Okay.
Something went wrong with your volume there.
I have my tripod here. Is this okay now?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, sorry. My foot hit the tripod and I jarred the system. Anyway, playing the role of scientist on one half, and then being a kinesiologist, touch health practitioner on the other side, wasn't always straightforward or easy. But most people in touch for health and kinesiology are not trained as scientists. Even these days, after all these years, not many real scientists are involved in kinesiology kinds of things. And that's too bad. But on the other hand, things do grow at whatever pace. Now, I started learning this stuff in 1977. That's been a few years ago. In the meantime, the whole field has grown dramatically. I mean, there are literally many thousands of people who do this kind of work now, as opposed to a few or a few dozen or a few hundred finally, back when I first started. And but when something, in terms of scientific sense, when something works and somebody else gets the same result when they do it, it's not the same result when they do it, that is a kind of scientific proof. It may not be done systematically and consistently and with proper record keeping and so on and so on. But in the practitioner's eyes, that's less important to be strictly scientifically oriented versus does it work? And does it keep on working? Does it work for me and other people too? If I get something and make it work, and you try the same thing, it doesn't work. It doesn't spread very easily. But if I get results and I tell you about it, and you do the same thing, you get results, you talk about it, and they get good results, they talk about it, then it spreads. And it may not be in a scientific way, a very deliberate, let's keep records of the first 100 million people who test or whatever. And that's why it does spread, because it does work. Now, the next question, of course, is how does it work? Why does it work? And that's a much more complex topic.
So that brings up the issue of, at some point you integrated more of the traditional Chinese medicine, Eastern approach of using points and flows in the body and the energy circuits around the meridians. How did that get integrated into, I mean, I realize some of it came from Touch from Health, but you have an integration of that that's a little different. How did you come to that?
Well, the point is that if you can ask verbal questions and get adequate and consistent results, then that makes things much more efficient. For example, if I can say to you, well, I think there's a reflex in your body which will tell us what your calcium, if your calcium level is high enough. Well, that's a good idea. Let's check it out. Now, where do I find this point? Start touching every point of your body till I find when it works that way, and hope that's only one. Well, that's one way. But if we have experience, maybe even subtly and not consciously, the energy is of the body, and we can ask the question, where on this scanning, scanning the body, where on this is the calcium reaction point? I'm making this up now. Okay. Then and you can ask the question on your head, on your torso, on your feet. Oh, on your feet. Okay, let's look at your feet. Then you can get work done very quickly and efficiently. And you may be correct, or you may not be correct. So how do you determine whether you're correct? Well, for this person, it seemed to work. How about the next person? How about the next person? How about the next person? So if it tends to work with most everybody, then that tells you that something about it is working. Now, your explanation may not be accurate, may not be correct scientifically, but as long as you can use something like that and get beneficial, consistent results, then that is a good scientific step. Now, in science, like many other things, of course, we can change our ideas or interpretations of things. If one morning I wake up and I open my eyes and I don't see anything, I might be blind. But it might be the lights are simply not on. so we have to be more attentive to what we're testing, what we think we're testing. And that's the whole thing about teaching various classes, whether it's Touch for Health or health kinesiology or natural bioenergetics, I call it now. It's still a matter of learning procedures, learning techniques, and learning the language that we're talking about. And not only that, but as different practitioners learn things, they also are learning, sometimes explicitly, sometimes just coincidence, implicitly. Certain things work better than other things. Certain things work more easily than other things. And I've got really extensive material about health kinesiology and natural bioenergetics, I call it, that have worked. A whole manual full of stuff that works. But as I learn more, sometimes those things that work, they still work, but I don't use them very much. Or maybe almost never, because they're not as good or as powerful as something I developed more recently. Or there's somebody else developed it, and I learned from somebody else, maybe, oh, well, let me give that a try. And, wow, that works really nicely. I'll do this now because it's better than what I was doing before. Easier or more commonly occurring or whatever. So if you're a good, in my mind, a good practitioner, you're not going to learn procedures like this, but you keep changing as you learn more. And you're changing what you name it sometimes. Matter of fact, I'm a real, well, this is my scientific part. I really like to have things named properly for whatever they are. Right? Now, some people wonder why I've given so many of my procedures certain names. And I don't have a rational description necessarily, but it's because of the practical stuff. That's what this does. It relates to energetically or physiologically or whatever else. And for example, the allergy correction procedure, we call it SET. That stands for symbiotic energy transformation. And if I use those words to somebody, it's like, well, what the heck does that mean, right? But the words actually tell you what happens if you understand the meanings of the words, of course. There is an energy transformation because somebody was allergic, now they're not. We're only talking about minutes away or even seconds away sometimes, depends what it is. Symbiotic means what? Was some, shall we say, a cooperation between something and another. So if two parts of your body are reacting in different ways to the same thing, that's not necessarily very symbiotic. So let's make sure the whole thing is the right reaction, the right place, and the right part of the body, and so on and so on. And so I like to give proper names for things, although not always understandable good names. They energetically are the proper names
Yes,
for things.
and we've seen over the years a few of the names change, and I think that's a good sign. It shows that we're growing and changing, understanding more, moving forward in a more coherent way with that. I realize as a practitioner it can be sometimes difficult to change the names that you've used for 10 years, but it really is kind of an important
Right,
process to go through that.
Exactly, because the meanings is the important part. The meanings of the words help you to understand what it is. And see, I've got this actually quite, to me, serious issue, which is that I've developed so much stuff over the years. I can't remember most of it myself because it doesn't come up very often. And so there are certain techniques that always work really quickly, easily, and reliably, and so on. Other things that come up so seldom, it's like, what did I mean by this? I haven't, good heaven, it must have been 5 years since I did one of these corrections. Well, what did I do? And I mean, look this up again, right? So this stuff that, at least most of the stuff, everyday stuff, as it were, is frequent, and people are learning and can remember it most of the time quite easily. But I've got stuff in my manuals that I've forgotten what it even means. It's been long ago, and I have so seldom used it. I have to look up in my class manuals what it is to do. But then I've also got a rather large volume of material that I've collected over the years and developed and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of it's kind of what's the right word? Enlightening in a sense that I've got so much stuff in my manual that I've written about that I don't remember what it is anymore.
Well, that brings up a question. In creating these new corrections, and you occasionally release new corrections that you developed, what's your process for figuring out if this is really just a variant of another correction, or is this a new correction? Kind of what's your process for figuring out that, and how do you decide when it's time to release a new correction?
I don't have a systematic way of doing that. Sometimes I'll find some new correction, and so the first step, of course, is to make sure that it works. You know, if you do a muscle test and while you're working somebody and it looks strong afterwards and it's like great, but it doesn't hold it for the next session, that's not an adequate correction. It may be helpful, but it's not a real correction the way I describe correction. Correction require a change in the energy, more or less a permanent change. And all the time I come up with combinations of stuff that are maybe uncommon or very even downright rare or never before seen or whatever. And of course I write all these things down, but then they may never occur again. It could be they don't never occur again for several kinds of reasons, I guess, maybe more than two. One is that it might simply be a subcategory of something else we already do a lot. And maybe the subcategory may be a little bit more efficient, but doesn't occur very often. And we still get other appropriate corrections done less efficiently, but another way, but a way that everybody's already been using, already know about. And so making another correction name, which is already covered by something other than some other correction name, well, that's redundant that way, but the one that you use the most ends up winning out, basically. Or the one that's much more effective, then it's really clearly more effective all the time. My practitioner manual I put together, I looked through there occasionally. I think, what does this mean? I forgot what I meant by doing this. Well, what that tells me is that it's something that doesn't occur very often, or has gotten covered by some other procedure. So it could be deleted from the book and nobody would notice because it just didn't come up. Except maybe sometimes you've got to do a whole batch of things at a, shall I say, a lower level to gain the skill to do things at a higher level. And so some of these things I believe are that. New students can learn how to do this one correctly and adequately, but they can't really do the other one until they get some experience. And that's not always easy to know when you're beginning for something that was manipulated around. If I initially develop something, it may well be that one of those things where it's only a temporary thing. When I learn to do something else that's new and the thought I just discovered disappears because it's covered by something else. Or sometimes it's because it helps me get into a new area of energy work that I hadn't realized or been conscious of or explicit about, which then may lead to a whole bunch of other things. Maybe not including what I originally got started with it, but developing into a wider area of work people can benefit from. And those are the ones that are fun. I like doing things that I've never done before. I get bored doing the same thing all the time. So I like to invent things. For example, the thing I developed a while back was the pyramids. These have been remarkable because instead of holding lots of points and using tubes of things or various objects, stuff like that, most of the time the pyramids alone will do the job. And the pyramids are very special because they're custom made. The design, you can't buy them anywhere that way except this and custom made. It's very specific sizes and lengths of sides and stuff like that. And the thing is, though, that when you start using the pyramids, it's so much easier and faster and effective that some older procedures, which you might need to know to develop your skill initially, they don't get used anymore because they're less efficient, and why bother when something else is better? But that becomes the dilemma because new students will not necessarily get the same benefit out of the pyramids because they don't have the energy, knowledge, energy experience to use them, shall we say, most effectively. Let me give you an example. Suppose you decide you want to learn to drive. You didn't have a driver's license yet. So what you do, you go out to some friend who has a 300-mile-an-hour car for racing, and that's how you learn to drive. You better hope nobody else is around when you start driving a car like that. So where do you start? You start with your pedal car, maybe. I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. That you start where you need to start and you learn to develop and grow as you do more learning and developing and growing, and you can do better and more things. And that's true throughout life in all kinds of ways. And it's especially true in the work we do. You can't start off as a brand new practitioner of this work with some very sophisticated things because you won't have the energy knowledge, you won't have the energy concepts of each of these things separately and clearly. So A and B and C may not be any different to you when you're new at it. But when you get to it, you turn out that A, B, and C actually are 13 different things, not 3 different things, because we can say about them better if you understand the subtleties of the energies. Mm-hmm. And that's a difficulty when we start teaching these things, you see, because some of these energy patterns don't occur very often. And so people have to develop the work and handle those sometimes unique, sometimes rare situations with energy. That's not easy. So we have procedures. We start with 1 and do a whole bunch of work. And start with next class 2 and a whole bunch of work. And as you do that, you're getting experiences that may seem boring or even inefficient, but it's what leads you to have the skill to do things that are very, very, very difficult energetically.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's one of the brilliances of this system is that as you hold the points on someone, you are learning from their energy system, and every different body that you learn from adds to your energy information, which allows you to become a better practitioner. And that's why pedagogically we insist on doing all these practices, and we insist on people putting hands on bodies and actually learning the work. And I think it's for that very reason that their bodies need to be educated from the body that they're actually working on.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And the only way you can develop this skill is by do the work. I mean, think about anything in our society. You know, if you are, for example, a Major League Baseball player, how did you get there? You probably were throwing baseballs when you were 8. If you didn't wait, you didn't start throwing baseball until you were 25, and you want to be a professional baseball player. The odds are pretty much against you. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's a really, really tough job at that point. And so it's everything we do. If you want to have more practitioners who are very skilled in these kinds of ways, well, how do we do that? Well, we start training people to be in the right direction of being a practitioner when they're very young. And that can even be when they're in school or grade school or high school or whatever else. Our children can learn a lot of these kinds of things quite easily, without all of the similar, with all the descriptions and theoretical stuff we talk about. You can just learn some techniques. And our class the same way. Look, when this happens to you, put your hand here and tap there, and that should help out for at least a while. And see, in my own work, I have an office, and people are welcome to come to the office as clients, but most of them don't. One reason is because I have clients from various countries in the world. Coming here for a session is quite an effort. So, but the point is that I can tell them things to do and help them do them without them actually physically being here. And so, for example, I might set of these pyramids I was talking about, because with the pyramids,
adjust your mic again. Your sound's gone down.
I don't. Maybe I'm just not talking loudly enough. Is this better?
Somewhat, but there was a distinct drop in the sound there. Maybe play with your tripod again, maybe something.
Is that okay now? The picture okay?
Yeah, that's better.
Because I moved the tripod slightly. Okay. So you people, we can do remote work that way because the energy is not just local. The energy is universal. And I learned many, many years ago, by coincidence or accident or whatever, that I could work with people at a distance. And, well, let me give a good example. There's a woman I did some work with in Europe when I was there. And worked out a batch of stuff. These are some foods that she shouldn't be eating. She was sensitive to them. Well, basically, I had forgotten about that until about a year later. She came to visit her family or whatever here in Ontario. And so I tested her for these food things. Even haven't forgotten I'd done it before a year earlier. And I got the same results. She told me the same result. I said, really? I'd forgotten I'd done this. Okay, so that kind of validation is very important. I can easily write down a list of foods. I don't eat these, and they can be pretty good list for most people. Don't do dairy. That's for almost everybody. Don't do sugar. That's pretty much for everybody. And so, but if we get a specific thing like buckwheat is not okay for you, but rye is okay for you, or whatever, and that's not a common combination. But if we get the same thing 2 different times, that's a good measure of reliability. And in turn, that suggests that the procedures, the techniques, the technology involved are also reliable. Now, being a scientist, I have actually a lot of scientific explanation for a lot of the kind of stuff that we do. I won't go into that now because it's a whole different topic. But the point is, it does make sense scientifically. There are other scientists who have written materials which are consistent with the theory that I use. Quantum theory is a very important concept in our work. Now, we don't teach that in most classes, but if students want to learn about how what we do really, really works on a very deep level, they need to learn a little bit about quantum theory.
You mentioned how important the universal energy is in our work, and that we don't really teach some of that scientific side, although I do in my teaching try to incorporate a lot of that for students and guide them as to where they can find some books and things because I think it is really important that they understand it. But tell us a little more about how you see universal energy working in our system and how we're using it and what it's doing for us in the process.
That's a several weeks long topic.
You give us the 3-minute synopsis.
3 minutes and nothing. Okay, I'll speak a little fast, and then I can get out. Well, it's two things. One is energy is what the universe is all about. And energy doesn't have any boundaries, really. We can block it, we can modify it, we can reflect it, we can do things like that. But we don't get rid of energy. Different types of energy have different functions. The sun, for example, is a big energy ball, shall we say. And if we didn't have that sun, we wouldn't be in our current status as humans existing in this world. There might be other beings, other creatures, and some are in different worlds, but we wouldn't be here otherwise. And the energy that is in our universe is universal. It doesn't stop. It may get degenerated, as it were, weaker with distance to certain, but some kinds of energies don't do that. They stay the same forever. So the thing is that we are energy bodies, we're energy structures. And when we were working properly, the energies in the body are working harmoniously and adequately and accurately. And if something is going wrong in our body, it's because that energy has gotten messed up. Let's use an example. The sun. It produces lots of energies. We use the light energy, we use the heat energy, but we get sunburned and we get blinded. Right? Same energy, just the amount of exposure and which portion of the spectrum and stuff like that. So it's the same with our everyday functioning. We need certain energies to function properly, but too much is not good for us. Not enough is not good for us. So it's a matter of selecting the right amount and the right kind in the right place. And most of those things are, most of that stuff, I should say, is actually built in our society. You know, when we have little kids, we say, don't play in the sun, hot sun too much, or here wear your shirt so you don't get sunburned, that kind of thing. But we also say, go out and play in the sun, you need some sunshine. So it's a matter of balance of things. And so all those things are energy things. Well, those are everyday language kinds of energy things. Everybody knows something along those lines. The energy we talk about is more what we call subtle energy. There are different frequencies, but they otherwise have similar qualities. And those different frequencies are related to our personalities, our intelligence, our way of dealing with the world, our way of learning, our way of ignoring things, or whatever. Some of it is social, but some are by design in our energy structures. And that's also an area where, shall we say, there's a whole lot more science to be done. But there's a lot of science that has been done that's ignored because people don't believe it or don't understand it or don't read it or whatever. And that's also why a lot of what we do seems so strange to people. The fact that I could, for example, work with somebody energetically when they are in, say, Europe, from home in Eastern Canada, that to me, that's no big deal. It's energy, and no matter where it goes, right? We can connect into it if we learn how to do that. But to other people, it's like, that's not possible. If it's out of sight or not on TV, you can't see it. It's not there. Is their kind of thinking attitude, which is incorrect. They may not be able to do what I can do, and you can do, and what other students can do, but it doesn't mean they can't learn it. You have to learn the technique. Just like when you're growing up, you learn how not to spend too much time in the sun or in the cold. You might play with snowballs all day long, but if you get so frozen, you lose a finger from frostbite. That's a little too much outside in the snow. And so, but it's the same with all kinds of energies. We have a need for all kinds of energies, and we utilize them for all of our functions, basically, one way or another. And our learning about energies is more, what's the right word? It's not so scientific in a sense, but it's more practical. Not theoretically so much, but practical. And so a mom might send the kids out to play in the snow because she wants to get some cleaner and rest done in the house. But she doesn't send them out to get sunburn, to get frostbite or sunburn. That's just a possibility that happens as a consequence of being outside. And so properly balancing the energy, properly utilizing the energies for our needs and our purposes, that's the real key. And it's also the key to our very healthy existence. If we are paying attention to all the energies that are relevant to us, then we are happier and healthier people. We get along with other people better, and we understand other things better. If we don't have any interpretation or knowledge or awareness of those kinds of energies, then we simply don't live as happy and nice a life. And those are not subtle energies. There are subtle energies too, but that's a subtle aspect of what we do, because people just don't understand that so much. And yet, it's an everyday thing for everybody.
One of the things that I've noticed, and a number of other teachers have said the same thing, that a lot of the younger students coming in now, those who are teenagers and in their early 20s and so on, understand this subtle energy in a much more coherent, obvious way than past generations have. There's enough sort of general information out in the public that they are aware of this, and they're much more sensitive to their energies and so on. And one of the things we've been finding is they go through the training program, they get it so much faster. But in the process, they still need to learn how to discipline and organize and manage their energies. And so we're trying to find that pedagogical balance between, yes, they get it really fast and get bored, and they need to develop the structure and the discipline and the usefulness of the energy that they are aware of. And so things are shifting and changing a little bit because of that. Do you want to say something about how you see that happening?
Well, that has to do with several things. One is the physical energy of the world also changes. For example, right now the sun is starting a cooling phase. It's going to last about 30 years. It has nothing to do with the climate on the earth causing anything. It has nothing to do with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It has to do with just plain old astrophysics. That's what the sun does. It does it routinely and predictably, and it has done thousands of years since it's been observed. But it's being turned into a political tax thing, and with a bunch of idiots doing their idiotic things, right? But if you really study the physics, you know exactly what's going on with the sun and why it's going on, and the fact that it'll last about 30 years and be back again at the end of that time. It's just a cycle that happens. And we go through these cycles too. But so often on our earthly plane here, we don't understand those things. And so we like to blame it on whomever, whatever they can. Well, you need to pay this tax because the solar activity is going through a solar minimum because of the pollution in the atmosphere, which is total idiotic nonsense, politically favorable, of course. And so that's the thing, you see. We need to learn about the energies in our bodies just as much as we know about the energy you see from the sun. The energy from the sun does affect us psychologically and mentally, but the main thing is still physiological for the sun and geological in the earth and so on. And what we have taken some baby steps toward is learning more about in our earlier training as people, as humans. Humans have energy cycles, have energies that are relevant and important and necessary, but we don't talk about those as much as, you'll learn about the solar system in third grade or whatever, but you don't learn much about meridian energy in third grade. That would be an interesting thing to start doing, start to teach that kind of stuff that early in classes.
Well, that's what we're finding is some of these kids are coming in with already knowing this information. They are taught about meditation. They are taught about, the ability to control their energies. They are taught about some of their subtle bodies. They're taught about their auras. And so they're coming in with that kind of information already in place. Wonderful, but then they need to figure out how to actually use it efficiently.
Yeah. Now, is your comment there related to people in general or just to people, the kids of the people who work in the field?
People coming into our training and how that impacts our training. The fact that they come in with a lot of this knowledge there, but don't really know what to do with the knowledge. And then how our training helps them organize and discipline and use their energy knowledge more efficiently.
Yeah. Well, ideally, let's put it this way, there are cultures on Earth from ancient times and modern times where the energy is very important. Everybody learns about it. Everybody uses it. And these we tend to think of as being the primitive cultures. And these ways are way ahead of the rest of us. But yeah, that's always been there. And if you look at the news in a broader sense, not the newspaper headlines in the morning, but the real news behind everything else, you can see that there's groups of people around the world who are very attentive and attuned to these kinds of energies, and they make use of them, and their society operates around them. And that's something we need to develop more. Now, me being a scientist, I'm going to say something that sounds anti-scientific, but it isn't.
Well, and I think part of what you said earlier about introducing new corrections and, you know, finding things that work more efficiently and those kinds of things. And as we sort of jiggle a little bit of how our curriculum is taught and when we teach what and introducing these new things into it and figuring out where to put them in, you know, that's all part of the process of this whole field growing and expanding and new information coming into place and new people using this information effectively. And I think that's wonderful. And the ability of people with a great deal of experience in some of the, you know, teachers and advanced practitioners have been doing this for 20 or 30 years now, and how it's shifting and changing, but yet still staying solid on its core scientific foundation of balancing the body, moving the energy and stresses, and allowing ways to grow and develop with the knowledge that people have. I think it's really helpful and interesting that the new corrections are often working in those kind of levels.
Yes, definitely. But I'm still like to see the point where schools start teaching kind of the stuff that we teach, but at an early age.
Mm.
And let me give you a little example. When I was in the, I think, 6th grade, yeah, I think 6th grade, in the classroom thing, there was some kind of, I think, a newspaper article to come up, and this came up in class somehow or another, and having to do with rain and weather or whatever. I don't remember exactly what it was anymore. But I gave a report about that because this is what we're doing in class. You know, report on news stories or things like that. And so I gave a thing about how you know, scientists are making rainfall now by doing whatever in the atmosphere. And the teacher made a comment after that. Said, "Well, maybe you'll be doing this when you grow up."
Hmm.
It had a big impact on me. I didn't intend it to. It just did. And the things we do with kids in general, same thing. You know, we need to give the kids the right, I hate to say it this way, kickstart. But sometimes we mean it that way. To learn, develop, and to be creative. And the thing is, we need to be allowing their kids to be more creative, supporting their kids to be more creative, instead of the do it my way or else you can't do it.
And that's a really important comment in consideration of how, you know, Natural Bioenergetics HK is this balance between science and intuition and creativity. And we always want to keep the two to there, but we don't want to turn it into such a robotic thing that it's just follow these instructions and do this, and if you don't do this, it won't work. It's that beautiful blend of science and art together. I don't know if you want to say something to the, it's mostly students listening to this, so say something to students around that and your perspective on that.
Well, in a lot of ways, art and science are very much the same. Think about it. If you are writing a poem, writing a novel. There's science involved in that. There's art in that. And a lot of scientific things are very artful, if I can make a word. um, and that can be any number of things. Um, when when the sun and the moon and the earth get in certain alignments, then we have things like eclipses. Well, that's science, but it's also art when you look at it. It's one of those beautiful, but also it can be a very touching kind of experience when people have never seen that before. And I once, many years ago now, there was a not a meteor, a comet that had come close to Earth. I remember one night I was out in my yard looking at not the eclipse, but the comet. The head of the comet was to the north, the tail to the south. I mean, really exactly north and south, stretching the entire sky. There's art to that. There was science to that. The experience of it is not describable, basically. What does it feel like when you see that? And so the art and the science and the world, it's all one thing.
Mm-hmm. I know, like I always explain in class the example of a cook. An excellent chef uses a lot of science. They have to know the chemical bonds and how foods react together. They have to know the art side. And together the two make wonderful food, but they have really solid foundation basics in what's the nutrition, what's the chemical processes going on, what's, if I do this, it's going to cause that. They have all the foundation solid, and then they can really create from that. And that's how I see what we do in natural bioenergetics. We have to have the foundation of knowing what the energy feels like, knowing what the circuits are, knowing what's going on in the body physiologically, knowing what's going on in the body psychologically, etc. And then you take that with the foundation of corrections that we have, the technologies and the processes that we have, and the techniques that we have in place, and you can create all kinds of things out of that flow because you have that solid core foundation. And I really appreciate the way that all works and the way that that's been developed over the years. I think it sets our stuff apart from many others.
Yes. I think that's one of the things that has been my biggest contribution to the field, which is bringing the science clearly focused rather than just coincidental.
Mm-hmm.
And because most people who do this kind of work are, quotes, clinicians, they're humanist oriented, not science oriented, and that kind of stuff. And so I'm pretty much one of the first scientists to actually work in this kind of area. And in my teaching, as you know, in some of my class manuals, I've some science stuff in there. Maybe only a brief introduction to the science bar, but you can see in those journals, those manuals, how important it is. Because what we do is science, and that's also why it works. Science works the way science works, and no matter what we like to believe, the science still works the same way. And so that's why it's so much of the work, although it may not always be consciously clear, it's really all science-based. And we can't say, oh yeah, and here I did a study of 3,000 people and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. See, that's for a more advanced level, shall we say, of evolution in the area. because science doesn't start off by doing a huge research study about something, because you have to know what it is you're testing, what you're trying to determine, what you're trying to find before you can do the work. And so that's pretty much what we've done now in our kinesiology and natural bioenergetics kind of work. And the rest of it is people being able to do the right science. Some of it's already done by other people, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. And it's not easy work. It's very difficult, and it's very time consuming, and but also very important. Recently there was a thesis that was published from a lady in the UK who did the really, really well science design with some of the muscle testing stuff, which I thought was really, really, really nice.
Dr. Ann Jensen from Oxford. We've been
Yes,
disseminating her work out through the various classes. I love the stuff she's doing.
That's right. And that's what we need to do. And but I was especially pleased at her doing that, because what that means is I tried doing a fairly large science study in the UK some years ago, and basically it flopped because people didn't understand the science enough. They didn't understand the need and whatever, so people just didn't do much cooperating. So, and I had not anticipated that, because my motivation, my energy towards science was blind, shall we say, to their blindness.
Well, maybe now that people are more aware of these kinds of issues and more of this is being done, it's time to start some new research projects in natural bioenergetics. And now that we have the computer facilities to record and do things so much more simply compared to all of the manual stuff that had to be recorded before, it might be more, maybe it's time to try some more.
Exactly. What I had done, and I had set up actually scientifically a very well designed study, but it was simply too much for people who were unskilled, inexperienced.
Mm-hmm.
And so I understood that, but it was a first attempt at doing some real science. But when she did her stuff, you could tell from her paper how much time and effort it took her to do this.
Mm-hmm.
A massive,
Yes.
massive job.
Yes, we're very grateful to her for doing it. And we're very grateful for all the time and energy and work you have put into creating this. And we look forward to Natural Bioenergetics continuing to grow and build and expand and become much more known around the world. I want to thank you for your time here. I much appreciate your sharing with us, and we look forward to maybe doing this another day around another topic.
Okay, let's do that.
Alrighty, thanks so much.
Okay, take care.